Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Skull Session Recruiting Podcast. I'm going to go solo today here. We're going to do a live episode here. Going to do some questions, some comments, whatever you guys are interested in talking about today. I have a feeling it's going to be very O-line based. But before we get started on that component, I would like to go over some things. Obviously, if you're on Twitter, there was a lot of stuff going on yesterday with the David Sanders commitment to Tennessee, a lot of conversations on Twitter, a lot of opinions on Twitter, and a lot of things that maybe aren't summed up best in the character limits that Twitter gives you. So let's start, because I think we're going to have a lot of differing opinions on this today, but let's start on something I think everyone can agree on, and that is offensive line recruiting right now is not good enough, and it hasn't been good enough for a while. It really hasn't been good enough in probably more than a decade. And I think the disagreement isn't that. I think most people agree with that. I think the disagreement is why that is, what needs to happen, what the symptoms, what the major, causes of that are. And so, and it's already started in the chat. I can see some of the comments about it. I want to start with this. Thank you for putting this up here. Frye needs to cast a wider net. I think that's fine. I think that it's kind of a however you want to do it type of thing. Certain things work for certain coaching staffs. I think that's ignoring the main problem here. So Ohio State's offered at least 30, maybe it's closer to like 32. They've offered over 30 guys in the 2025 recruiting class. And they've only got 2 commitments right now. They're both in-state guys. They're 2 for 2 in Ohio. They're 0 for 28 essentially at this point. And that could change. Maybe they get somebody, maybe they get McFadden, maybe they flip somebody, whatever. But as we sit here today, they're 0 for 28 out of state. So if you tell me that if they offered 38 out, if you want to get to 40 or 50 offers, well, he's missed on the first 28. So if if you think offering 40 or 45 instead of 30 is going to magically improve the quality of their offensive line classes, I'm not going to necessarily agree with that. Again, I don't disagree necessarily with the philosophy of, hey, let's put out some more offers maybe a little earlier so that maybe if there's a guy out there that hasn't committed somewhere else yet, that he would be more likely to join the class. I mean, that's possible, but generally what happens in Alabama and Georgia are the 2 schools that get thrown out there a lot that offer maybe 50 guys. Half of those offers are BS. They're either not going to take those kids before they commit somewhere else. They're going to let them go to Georgia Tech. They're going to let them go to Rutgers. They're going to let them go to North Carolina State, like whatever. Or they're never going to take them no matter what. And they're just spraying offers. A lot of times you see this at places, especially in the Southeast, where you have schools like Buford and Hoover and like all these other places where they've got like 10 Division I prospects, and coaches just go in and offer all of them. And they're really only trying to get 1 or 2 of those kids. So it's not that simple. They need to, quite frankly, the major symptom here, the major problem that needs to be treated is Ohio State's got a very good history along the offensive line. Even recently, like recruiting has been great the last 10, 15 years, but we're not, you got Paris Johnson in the NFL, who's a spudding superstar. DeJuan Jones had a great rookie year. We're not that far removed from Nick Mangold and Jack Mewhort and Corey Lindsley. There are guys that have had not just NFL careers, but Pro Bowl, borderline Hall of Fame NFL careers, or are in the midst of them. That's not being sold effectively, clearly. Yes, Norwell, Taylor Decker just signed a huge extension. Like they are not effectively selling their product right now. And so you can offer 28 guys or you can offer 48 guys. If you're not effectively selling your product, if you're not effectively selling the history of Ohio State's development along the offensive line and your current development, like Frye has had a hand in a lot of these recent guys, either as a recruiter or as a developmental guy. You look at someone like Josh Simmons, who I think people were making fun of at this time last year, who look, if he has a good year this year, he's probably going by the end of the second round. Donovan Jackson's going to be drafted. I tend to think Josh Fryer is going to be drafted. And then they've got a couple of young guys who I think will eventually blossom into that. So there are things here that they can be selling that clearly aren't being sold, because if you go 0 for 28, you're not going to convince me that the biggest problem is they didn't offer 15 more guys. You went 0 for 28 on out-of-state prospects so far in this cycle. So we can argue about that. We can talk about that, but at some point, you have to close on your top of the board guys. And you look at Alabama and it's guys, Micah DeBose wasn't their 40th or 50th offer of the cycle. Ty Haywood wasn't their 40th or 50th O-line offer of the cycle. These are 5-star, borderline 5-star guys. These are top of the board guys. They're not getting, you want them to offer 20, you want Ohio State to offer 15 or 20 more kids to make the numbers equal with Alabama or Georgia. They're not getting that far down the road. So they're not going 0 for 28 on their first 28 out-of-state offers in a cycle. They're hitting their top of the board guys. And yes, Donovan Jackson was not recruited by Frye, but he's been coached by Frye now for third year. I mean, so he's been developed by Frye. So you absolutely, have to use that to your advantage, whether you recruited them or not. So there is a major disconnect here. And so that's where the questions have to start. You have to, you have to get to the root of why. So these are the questions for me. It's not does he need to offer 15 or 20 more guys? That's fine. I think that's the thing you can always talk about is recruiting strategies. How many offers do you put out? Where do you put the offers out? How many in-state kids do you take? There's a lot of things that you can talk about every year. But in terms of the current problem, I think the questions need to more be based in what they're doing with the kids they're offering. Is Justin Frye putting in enough time in terms of relationship building? Is Ryan Day involved enough? I've said this before, the last couple offensive line coaches needed help from the head coach and the regional coaches. We can go all the way back to Ed Warner. Jamarco Jones, Mike Vrabel was huge with Jamarco Jones. Larry Johnson helped them in Maryland with Isaiah Prince. Greg Schiano led the charge on NPF. Urban Meyer led the charge on Wyatt Davis. Schiano was very involved with Whippler in New Jersey with his ties there. So are you getting enough time in with these guys from your coaching staff? I think that's the first obvious question. Then we get into, why aren't you selling this effectively? And this is mostly a Justin Frye thing, but it also does fall on the head coach. Because again, when O-line coaches in the past struggled, Urban Meyer would step in. Gosh, when Ryan Day recruited Harry Miller, when he was an assistant. So, and if you go back and look at Harry Miller's comments in terms of committing to Ohio State, signing with Ohio State, Ryan Day is the guy they mention. So Day should kind of know that if you've got a position coach who's, not getting all the guys he needs to be getting, are you doing enough to step in and help? Are your, area guys doing enough to step in and help? So these are the types of questions that I think Ohio State needs to be asking itself much more than, boy, would this happen if we had offered 10 more kids that we probably don't want? Because you can get those kids. They've committed to Indiana by now. They've committed to Illinois by now. They've committed to Louisville or Kentucky by now, but you can call those kids in November and flip them. So those are the questions I think need to be asked. What's a bigger concern, OL recruiting or development? It's definitely recruiting for me. I think the development's been okay. I think they've got a lot out of Josh Simmons. I think they got a lot out of Josh Frye, who was not a very heavily recruited guy. But it's pretty arrogant to offer so few high school kids. Again, I mean, sure, yeah, you could offer 10, 15 more, but again, you've missed on 28. So, like, what are we doing? But that's the problem. They've got to figure out why the sales pitch is what it is. And, the 5-star to Georgia Tech, sometimes kids want to stay home and there's nothing you can do about it. Like, in fact, like, when you see a finalist, like this, I always joke about this. Like, if a finalist is like Georgia Tech, like Jahmyr Gibbs, if a finalist is Georgia Tech, if a finalist is, even look at someone they got, ultimately landed and signed, who they lost, and like Noah Rogers, if a finalist is NC State, or even like if you go the other way, if like academics, if a finalist is Stanford, that should perk your ears up. That's actually not really, for me, a huge thing. I mean, we see that happen a lot. Like, guys just want to stay within a 30-mile radius of their house, and those schools are generally going to have more resources too. So I mentioned like the $800K for Petty. Well, who else is Georgia Tech spending that kind of money on an NIL? Nobody. They've got to get the big splash and keep the borderline 5-star kid home. Jay Cook's not getting $800,000 to stay home for Ohio State. So there are things at play there with the Georgia Tech thing. So I'm not too wrapped up in that. I think Petty was always going to go to either Georgia Tech or Florida State, which is not that far down the road. But so there's always interesting things with lists. So whenever there's a local school on there that doesn't make sense, you should pay attention to that. Like, pay attention when Missouri's in with Luther Burden. Like there are just things you need to. There are just times that kids just want to stay closer to home, and that just happens. But again, you can't go over 28. Like, what are we talking about here? Like, if you offer 40, like, you're going to get 29, 30, 31. Okay. Are you going to be happy with that? Are you going to be happy with getting the 40th choice in a recruiting class? Because nobody's doing that. Like, all these examples that people are just throwing out on Twitter, like, well, Alabama offered 50 kids. Alabama didn't even think about 30 of those kids. They just offered. They didn't even think about it. They didn't recruit them. They didn't do anything with them. They were never going to take them. And they got their top of the board guys. So offering 50 guys was nothing more than a publicity stunt for, whichever high school coach or program, they're trying to fuel. So, we'll see, what they do here. The numbers are already being thrown out there for 2026. Yes, they've only offered 16 guys. They've offered 3 guys from Ohio. They've offered another kid from the Ohio-West Virginia border. They've offered 4 kids essentially from Ohio. Like, Deron Parks is from West Virginia. Deron Parks is on record with me multiple times telling me Ohio State's the home school for him. It's closer to Morgantown. Ohio State's closer to him than Morgantown. So they've essentially offered 4 in-state guys already. So again, I don't want to beat this thing to death because I'm going to get off this point here in a second, but they've offered 4 in-state guys. Yes, they're recruiting Adam Guthrie. Should they offer him? I think you do. Look, his junior season hasn't even started yet. The level of competition he plays isn't very good. You may want to see a game or two of junior film, but scholarships are about to go from 85 to 105. You're going to need to take 6 or 7 probably at least in 26 with the scholarship increases and everything else. So, the idea that, again, they should have 40 offers out on O-line right now, like, that's fine if you feel that way. Again, I'm not trying to like talk you out of that, but what I'm saying is they've offered 16. If they don't get the Ohio guys and among that 16, if they don't get those guys, does it, like, they're not signing a good class at that point. So whether they offer 40 or 50 guys is almost, I don't say irrelevant, but it just doesn't matter if they're not going to get these Ohio guys. Like, they're not going to sign a good class. But we'll see. And someone, can we throw up the Guthrie and Conroy point again? Because that's something I do want to get into. So Adam Guthrie will come. Friday didn't offer either one. Yeah, I mean, they have offered Conroy. I get what you're saying there with Day. So that does bring me to kind of my next point. As far as Frye specifically, I posted this on the board before David Sanders announced. I posted this. It was in our chat. I think it was Thursday. We had our daily chat, and someone was asking me about Frye's job security, and I laid out, I think it was like 4. I'll summarize for people who aren't on our site who should be, because the season kicks off in 2 weeks, and why aren't you there? But I laid out like some criteria that, like, look, if these criteria aren't met in the next 3 to 4 months, there could be some decisions to make, some very big decisions to make. And everyone in the building, I think, knows this already. And those things are, look, obviously the David Sanders decision, yikes. The way they finished 25 recruiting, to be determined. The way they start 26, which goes into Guthrie and Conroy and the Ohio guys they've offered, and Deron Parks and Champ Smith and those guys. And how the offensive line, obviously, and this is always going to be the biggest one. It is what it is. No matter how much you love recruiting, is how the offensive line performs on the field this fall. So now we've seen the David Sanders decision. We assume that's not going to be reversed. We don't know how 25 is going to finish. We don't know how 26 is going to start, and we don't know how the offensive line is going to play this year yet. But my point in all that, in my answer, the cliff notes of that was, these are the kind of the criteria right now. These are the important things for Frye. And if a couple of these aren't met, yeah, this could be an interesting winter. This could. So I think that, yes, I'm not protecting anyone here. I very much think if 25 doesn't finish strong, if, would they allow this to get, like, they're gonna have to take a portal guy anyway. So, like, I don't know that the portal is going to factor into like any decisions on Frye, but like, they're going to have to get a portal guy anyway. They were going to have to do that anyway. Like, I've said this for like 18 months, 25 after the 24 season, they're gonna have to get a plug and play guy, whether that's a starter somewhere or whether it's like a 6th or 7th man type of thing for depth. They're going to have to go to the portal. That's just the reality of the offensive line, and knowing that even like David Sanders, if you get him, the odds of him coming right in and being one of your 3 or 4 best offensive linemen are not great. Like, Paris Johnson didn't start as a true freshman. Like, so you're going to need a body. So I think that's probably a Ryan Day thing. But yeah, like if the 25 class continues to go this direction, if David Sanders sticks with Tennessee, if Guthrie isn't offered maybe in a few months, or more importantly, if things continue to maybe not trend in the greatest direction for Will Conroy, who I think is the best center in the class nationally, these are all very bad. And if all of that happens, the offensive line is going to have to be amazing this fall for that to be like a justifiable thing at this point. So, I fully like am aware, or with many of you on this, that this is a very, very big 4 or 5 months for Justin Frye. And again, I laid out the criteria. I'll repeat it again because I think we just like doubled in numbers in the last like 10 minutes. So the criteria for Frye right now to avoid a very, very interesting winter is finish 25 recruiting, better than what we're sitting at right now. Get off to a good start in 26. You've offered essentially 4 in-state guys. There's 2 or 3 more Ohio guys in 26 who warrant a very close look. Adam Guthrie, he's got a brother. Adam Guthrie being one of the big ones. And then again, how the offensive line plays this fall. Certainly the offensive, I think Ohio, obviously the expectations are national championship this fall for Ohio State. Everyone knows that. We cannot look back at the end of January and be like, man, if the offensive line had played a little better, they could have done this. Like, that can't be a thing either. So, like, there's a lot of things here. And if those criteria aren't met, yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting winter in Columbus for offensive line. But let's go a little bit here. We got some questions now. So we can start throwing some up, and I can kind of go into that. Will Frye offer Andrew Babalola? I think at this point, the answer is probably yes. I don't, they're like, the options right now are about nil. What I would do now is obviously you've got to start spraying some offers here soon. So whether that's in like 3 weeks, once you've seen like game 1, game 2, whatever of high school film, of senior film, because sometimes guys pop as seniors, O-line's developmental. Some of these guys don't play as sophomores. They get bigger, stronger as juniors and seniors. But yeah, I mean, they're going to have to, as I said yesterday, they're going to have to reshuffle the deck, which means they're going to have to offer some guys here probably in the next 3 to 4 weeks at the very, 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 very latest. So I think at this point, and this kind of, not to get back into the offers thing, this is kind of a semantics thing. So you don't have to offer a kid to talk to him. So like, that's the other kind of thing here is like, have you been talking to guys? Because you don't have to offer them to talk to them. You can sit there and be like, here's our situation. We need to see like your first 2 games of senior film, or here's our situation. We're not sure of our number. There's a million reasons you can throw out there for why you haven't offered a kid yet. But you can keep up the dialogue and build a relationship. So have they been doing that the way they should? So that's another thing here. I think we're going to find out, but Nolan Davenport. So that was a guy I thought would eventually get an offer. He didn't, I guess from their perspective, he did not do enough at camp the day he camped, and he committed to Wisconsin the next day. So like, do I think they could repair that if they wanted to? Yeah, I think they could, but you kind of see how kids feel about things by what they do. Nolan didn't go home and be like, let me wait a few weeks, or let me think about this. What do I want to do? He clearly was like, oh, you didn't offer me. I'm committing to Wisconsin right now. So he jumped on that right away. So that obviously shows some anger or, some type of feeling toward the situation there with not getting offered at camp. But, so that I always think you can repair things with Ohio kids that want to be Buckeyes or grew up wanting to be Buckeyes. You can usually repair those. It's a matter of, does Ohio State want to? Because they could have offered him at camp. They didn't. And now we have to see if they want to. And again, I go back to going from 85 to 105, which is a whole other episode probably as far as roster balance and things like that. But I do think you're going to maybe want to take 1 or 2 more this year than you initially were going to. And I do think next year you may take 1 or 2 more than you were initially going to, just to kind of balance things out as you try and work your way to 105. Because what you're not going to do is sign a 45-man class to get to 105. You're going to have to kind of play catch up over 2 or 3 cycles. Since Colorado's seen interns, I'm sorry, reach out. That's to me, because you don't we can talk about plan B or contingency plans all we want. If you miss on David Sanders, you're not replacing David Sanders with David Sanders 2.0. Like, you've lost David Sanders. Like, there's no contingency plan for not getting Jeremiah Smith. Like, there's no contingency plan for not getting a player like Brandon Innes, or like, these are like elite players. You don't just have like your backup plan is always going to be several notches below that caliber of player. So, like, Thomas, what you're saying there is kind of a good point. And quite frankly, a more immediate help than anything they could get in 25, David Sanders included, is they need to keep a very close eye on kind of the coach change market and just kind of, who might be unhappy in their current situations. And you can do this legally. I mean, it's not a problem to call a high school coach and be like, hey, how's so-and-so doing at college? Are they happy where they're at? Do they like their O-line coach? Do they like their head coach? Whatever it may be. So yeah, they need to be very vigilant on the transfer market and get out in front of it, and not get caught flat-footed, and try and stay ahead of that as best they can. Let's bring up stud. I got to address some of the stud stuff. So when Stud was here, this happens a lot. And it's human nature. Like, we all do it. When guys are gone and coaches have been gone for a while, we tend to romanticize them a little bit. We tend to forget all the criticisms we had of them while they were here. I mean, there are so many things people complained about with Tressel and Meyer that go totally just unremembered by now, and that's fine. Like, it is what it is. But I think we're reaching the romanticizing of Greg Stajwara period. Stud getting Paris. Let's go back to what happened with Paris Johnson. Paris Johnson was committed to Ohio State firmly, was not visiting anywhere else, was all in with Ohio State. And why was that? That was because of his relationship with Urban Meyer. What happened when Urban Meyer, retired? Paris freaked out. He started visiting other schools. He essentially opened his recruitment because he didn't have a very good relationship with Greg Stajwara at the time, because Urban Meyer had driven that. So the idea that was salvaged is like not a plus on the scouting report there for me of Greg Stajwara. Like, an unprecedented number of misses in Ohio. So let's go back to 2019. Class of 2019. Stud misses on 4 Ohio kids that he offered. Now, I'm not talking about, he misevaluated. He didn't offer them and they turned out to be really good. Like, that happens to everybody. He offered 4 Ohio kids that he didn't sign. That's unprecedented. Like, that's not even a thing that's ever happened to Ohio State. What happens in 2020? Paris Johnson freaks out. So that goes from being the leader of the class, your gem recruit, to visiting all over the SEC, visiting all over the country, and you're panicked and you're trying to keep him in the fold. And what else does he do in 2020? He goes low-hanging fruit. Instead of getting himself into some battles, he takes early offers and commitments from kid from Elder, who I'm blanking on, Jacob, Grant Toutant, Trey LaRue. All these kids, bless their hearts, we all knew at the time were not Ohio State caliber, and were validated over the next 3 or 4 years because Jacob James, sorry, I was blanking on his last name. And we knew that. We said when they all, like, what are they doing here? Why are they doing this so early? It's like, it's the winter, it's the spring. Why are you doing this right now? You can get those guys literally like the eve of signing day. You can call those guys and get them. Like, this is what we were dealing with. If you're an Ohio State fan, this is what you were dealing with. So I don't think looking back and saying, he wasn't that bad. Like, it was pretty bad, which doesn't excuse what's happening now. If you look at what Frye has done, the one upgrade with Frye from stud is that Frye is not missing on Ohio kids that he's offering. And that sounds silly, and it should be silly. Like, we should be at the point now with O-line recruiting where we shouldn't have to look at at who is the O-line coach. We shouldn't have to look at them and be like, well, at least they get the Ohio kids. Like, that should kind of be expected, right? Like, that should be expected for every position coach to get their kids from Ohio that they want. But that's like, if we're doing the Justin Frye scouting report, the positives and the negatives, that is the positive, is he hasn't had a Jackson Carman, a Blake Miller, a Zeke Correll, a JD Duplain. He hasn't had that yet. Now, if that starts, as we talked about earlier, if that starts to happen with Will Conroy and like some of these, then set off all the alarms, because this is the positive on the scouting report right now, is that you are getting Carter Lowe. You are getting the Ohio kids you want. And to an extent, I would consider Ian Moore an Ohio kid. So you're getting those kinds of guys. You're not missing on those guys, which was happening quite a lot in the lead up to it's quite frankly, probably the reason Justin Frye's here is because guys like that were getting away every year, consistently every year. So if that stops happening, if Frye starts missing on Will Conroy, if we got talking about Deron Parks and Max Riley and those guys, if those start being dicey, real problem. Not just there's not a fire, not now the fire has spread from just your apartment to the entire complex. So that's the kind of thing to watch here. I think even more than how they finish in 25 is the next few months of 26. Are you really not going to get Will Conroy? Because that should have been a layup. Or you have to fight for Max Riley? That should be a layup. What are, so there are some things here that build into that with 26. But yes, I had to kind of address the stud comments though, because I talked to every parent of every recruit stud ever recruited at Ohio State. I talked to every kid stud ever recruited at Ohio State, and the reality of that was a lot of heavy lifting had to be done by Urban Meyer and by the regional coaches. And you saw that with in-state recruiting, because unless you believe, I'm not trying to insult anybody here, but unless you believe that he's incapable of landing lifelong Ohio State fan JD Duplain, lifelong Ohio State fan Nick Samac, he's incapable of landing lifelong Ohio State fan Blake Miller. Unless you believe he's incapable of that, if you believe he's incapable of that, which he was, but then he's somehow capable of leading the charge on Wyatt Davis, this is just not reality. Urban Meyer led the charge on Wyatt Davis. They got MPF because Greg Schiano is Mr. Berkeley Prep. He coached there for a year or two during his hiatus. He was all over, his hands were all over that program. NPF was going to go wherever Greg Schiano told him to go. If Greg Schiano said, actually, I don't know if Ohio State's a right place for you, Nick, you should probably go to Florida. Nick would have went to Florida. But of course, Greg Schiano's not going to do that as an Ohio State coach. But there are some things, there's a little revisionist history going on with that. So address that. But again, I don't, if there's anything I would say it's a positive here, I think that everything we're talking about here, this needs to change, this needs to be better, this needs to whatever it is. It's well known, I think, inside the I don't think there's this haze across Ryan Day of oh, everything is fine, that meme, everything is fine, this is fine. I don't think that's happening. You can't do anything right now. You can't fire someone for missing on David Sanders. You can't if Hartline misses on a 5. Well, Hartline's probably a bad example, but you can't just fire a coach the day after he misses on a 5-star prospect in the middle of fall camp. But Ryan Day's aware of hey, this isn't good enough. We need 26 to not be a clown show. The offensive line better be good this year. These are all things I think that everyone's aware of. So again, if these things don't get fixed here the next 3 or 4 months, I can't really say it much clearer. I do think January becomes a very interesting month. Like I think it does. I think, but there's 3 or 4 months for things to get fixed. And we'll see if they do. I mean, that's all we can do. I mean, we're not recruiting kids. You guys aren't recruiting. Like, we just have to kind of, wait and see what gets fixed, what doesn't, and how things look. Yeah, I mean, you're going to pay a premium to get someone like David. Like, I think those numbers are pretty close. But as was told to me many, many, many times, from people at Ohio State, they weren't going to lose David Sanders, and they didn't lose David Sanders over NIL. They were competitive there. This was a decision, I think, that, unfortunately, I think came down a little bit of geography. And I think, again, Tennessee, if you look at what Tennessee's done in this class, and you can do the low-hanging fruit. You can do what every other school does and say it's NIL, because that's the new thing. The new didn't want to compete is NIL. Every school does it. Whenever they miss on a kid, it's NIL. And then whenever they get a 5-star kid, it's because that kid just, out of the goodness of his heart, just loved that school and turned down like way more money elsewhere to be at that school. And that's kind of the annoying thing that's going on right now. But Ohio State was competitive in NIL with David Sanders. If you look at what Tennessee's done, they got David Sanders and they got Douglas Utu. Those are like Ohio State. Now, Ohio was never going to get Utu. And quite frankly, for most of the process, I didn't think they had a chance at Sanders either, but they were never going to get Utu. But Tennessee was able to convince those guys of something. And it's more than just dollars and cents. Because if you're David Sanders, if you're Douglas Utu, you can get $1 million at more than one school. Like, you can. So there's tiebreakers here. And if you listen to David, if you kind of listen to some other recruits that pick Tennessee, they are fully convinced that Tennessee's an O-line factory. Is Tennessee an O-line factory? I would say they're not. Darnell Wright was a good player, was a very good player there. But if you look at like the last 30 years at Tennessee, I would not consider Tennessee an O-line factory. Yet they've been able to sell what they've done with O-line better than Ohio State has. And that to me is concerning. And someone told me I was doing damage control saying this yesterday. That's not damage control. That's more damning to say that Ohio State is doing a worse job selling their product than schools like Tennessee, than to throw up my hands and just say, well, if they would just offered 15 more kids, they wouldn't be in the situation. That's damage control. Telling someone that, oh, if they just offered more kids, that's damage control. Telling people on Twitter very publicly, not hiding from it, not, playing and doing the home team reporter thing and everything's fine, or making excuses, telling people that other schools are doing a better job selling their process, their development, their whatever it is, than Ohio State on the offensive line. That is not good. That's not good at all. And that needs to change. Brian Hartline, Ohio State went through a bit of a receiver drought. If you actually go back and look, from like, I don't know, maybe like late 2000s into the mid 2010s, they had a guy here and there, but like they kind of, they got away from kind of what they were doing in the 90s and the early 2000s in terms of like, it felt like every year they had a first round pick, and they got away from that a little bit. Well, Brian Hartline, and to his credit, Zach Smith was able to help do that. Zach's got a lot of good guys too. I'm not trying to discredit what Zach was doing, but kind of like the end of the Tressel era and then into the beginning of the Meyer era, they kind of fell off a little bit. Brian Hartline was able to sell receivers on Ohio State without his own track record, other than he played in the NFL. And there's a lot of guys who played in the NFL that can't develop. So he was able to take a situation that was good but not amazing and make it amazing. And what the offensive line brain trust at Ohio State has done the last 10 years is take a really good situation and make it not that great. And that's the problem. That's the difference in sales and being able, and not necessarily just sales, but just being able to get your message across and felt by these guys. Because that's the huge problem right now, is you're letting a school like Tennessee it's one thing to lose a kid. I think it's one thing to lose kids to Alabama and Georgia. Like, they've got a pretty equal track record, all things considered, developmentally, winning championships, all that stuff. When you're letting Tennessee paint a narrative that you're going to be better developed there, when there's very little historical evidence to show that to me is alarming. And so that's the that's the theme of, I guess, of today's episode. But that's not damage control. That sure as hell is not damage control. And that sure as hell is not, playing for the home crowd or playing for the home team when you sit here and you say, like, they're not doing a very good job selling their product. So that's, and that's, I know I kind of went off on a tangent there on the David Sanders thing, but yes, I believe he got more than $1 million. I believe Ohio State would have given him more than $1 million. I don't think that's why they lost David Sanders. And Ohio State would be the first, like, we get the texts, okay? Like me, I'm like guys like Berm, we get the texts when a kid commits elsewhere. Thought he was worth more than he, whatever, wanted more, from different sources, not always Ohio State people. Could be people around the program who have some knowledge of things, not necessarily coaches or anything like that. But like, we get those, like, NIL strikes again or whatever. That no one's saying that about David Sanders. Like, they're just not. So, what else we got here? $1,000%. Yeah, I mean, that's true. Every case is a little different. I mean, kids hit the portal for different reasons, coaching changes. Some kids outplay their high school ranking. They find out very quickly, like, boy, I'm at Akron. I should have been at Illinois, or I'm at Akron. I should have been at Ohio State. What's going on? Why am I'm like way better than everybody here? That happens. But yeah, there are kids. What I think you got to watch for are like the multi-time transfers, especially guys who like play. They're not transferring for like down for like playing time. It's essentially, to put it in like pro sports terms, they're playing out like their 1 year option, and then they're not picking up their player option for year 2, and they're essentially hitting the market every year to try and get the best deal. There's no question that's going on. There's no question. What else? To come here and say they don't even hear from Frye. This to me is probably the most alarming thing, because take Frye's name out of this and put Stud's name in for it. And that was me 5 years ago. I couldn't tell you how many kids I talked to that they hadn't offered, or a lot of kids that they did offer, and that who even not only did they offer, they were kids Ohio State wanted. They weren't even like plan Bs, where I would get a private conversation, or they would sometimes share it in articles of like, yeah, I don't hear from Stud very much. I talk to Urban a lot. I talk to, my area recruiter, Tony Alford, or my area recruiter, Zach Smith, or Brian Hart, whatever. But I don't talk to Stud as much. And it's like, yikes. And if there was anything like, this is how we do things. Like when we make changes, we all do this, whether it's if you own a business and you have employees, or whether you just changes in your life, or just change it, whatever it is, you tend to go from like one extreme to the other. So like if you get rid of somebody for something they're not doing, it's like kind of like in the NFL. If they go like, they have a defensive head coach and they fire him, they hire the offensive guru as their head coach. You would think if there was one thing that they were going to do in the post-Stud era, it was to make sure whoever they hire is like an A+ communicator, an A+ user of the cell phone, like whatever. Like, you would have thought they would have went like total opposite there. And as we were hearing, I didn't get much of this at the beginning, but yeah, if we start to hear more of this, like, yeah, like I'm not talking to Coach Frye a lot, that is like, man, that's why you made the change. So that's definitely something to watch. Now, I will say this. they are just now able to contact, they're just not going to be able to contact 26s. Like they couldn't back in May, June, July, they were not able to call 26s. Now, that's a whole other argument. Should they be doing that anyway? Should they be finding ways to do that? Yes, because you can always call a high school coach. So to me, there's not a huge excuse for that. You can always call a high school coach and be like, hey, when can I chat with Johnny? I need to talk to him. NCAA rules don't let me call him. Other schools may be breaking these rules. I'm not going to do that. When can you bring Johnny into your office after school, before school, whatever, and go ahead and put him on the phone with me? And that's perfectly legal. It happens all the time. It's what they should be doing. Is that happening enough? And so, yeah, these are things that, again, if you're regurgitating this, or you're repeating kind of the same things that led you to make a change in the past, that's not good. That's never good. But I keep seeing, I'm seeing more about these, like if Oregon offers them, if Alabama, can you put up if Oregon offers, if Georgia offers? I'm not trying to call people out, but these are like interesting things I want to talk about. Then there was a post about if Oregon offers, if Georgia, if Oregon and Georgia offer, then they're clearly Ohio State good or something like that was the comment. But again, I say to that, that's the comment I want to talk about. Half of Alabama's offers, half of Georgia's offers are nonsense. They're not OSU good because they're not Alabama good and they're not Georgia good. And those schools are offering them with no intention of ever actually accepting their commitment. So I think we have to not deal in absolutes when we talk about the offers game. There are kids with offer lists. I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus, but I'm going to use an example because I have to, because if I just say this with no example, then it just sounds like I'm pulling something out of my what. So everyone was completely up in arms this time last year that Ohio State hadn't offered Dwayne Galloway. Georgia offered him. He's got to be Georgia good. Why hasn't Ohio State offered him? He's got all these offers. Dwayne Galloway's committed to Purdue. And I actually think Dwayne's better than Purdue. So this is coming from a place where I think Dwayne's pretty good. But offer lists are complicated. It's just not a black and white thing. Just kind of leave it at that. What else? What else we got? I have not gotten that vibe to the extent I got it under previous offensive line coaches. And I say that plural because for whatever reason, the last previous 3 or 4 offensive line coaches were, for various reasons, were kind of non-recruiters. I haven't had the drum beats as loud with Frye, but so I'm not going to go as far and say he doesn't like to recruit. I don't know that. I know that whatever his method is right now is not effective enough. That's for sure. So if it is not being passionate about it, that's obviously a problem. If it's an approach that's not connecting, that's obviously a problem too. I don't know what it is, but it's not good enough. And I think clearly we got a comment there. It says Frye is a problem with building relationships. I think that's hard to deny at this point. If generally speaking, and you can throw NIL out there, you can do all this, you can throw all the excuses you want out there. Generally speaking, if you're not landing a competitive percentage of your targets, I generally think that's true. Until percentages change on that, until he goes out and gets a 4 or 5 star kid from Georgia, Florida, Texas, California, Pennsylvania, whatever it might be, until he does that at a higher percentage, that's a fair criticism. I don't know how it's not a fair criticism. How much is Dave's French fry interfere with this? I think we'll know the answer to that in a few months, because if Frye turns this around, if they finish strong in 25, if we're sitting here on January 1st, he's got 3 or 4 commits in 26 from like top targets, and the O-line played really well during the season, and they're like in the national championship hunt, like, can you objectively make a change? Probably not. I don't know how you can if like the criteria is being met. If the criteria is not being met and we're in, season's over, so mid-January, hopefully third week of January, and we're not hearing anything, or Ryan Day's out there sort of like giving a stamp of approval, or there's no change, like we're fine, then I think it's time to ask that. But we haven't reached Billy Davis territory yet. This is Frye's third season. Recruiting up until this year has been not great, not terrible. You can't just fire a coach every year. That creates more problems. You get into a cycle of just having bad, like 1-year rollovers. You come to a point where you get to where the Ohio State secondary was a few years ago. When you go Taver 2.0 and Grinch, and you're just rolling guys over. That creates more problems than even having a bad assistant may create. But I think it's a fair question, but I think it's more of a question that will be answered here this offseason based on performance here the next 3 or 4 months and what Day's mindset is. But I don't think, said a shorter and different way, if someone else was the head coach and this was Justin Frye's third year, I don't think Justin Frye would have been fired by now by anybody. Certainly not by Urban, certainly not by Tressel. But yeah, we'll see in a few months. The line looks good this year. It would show Frye can develop players, send someone else on the road. That's an option. I mean, as far as, maybe not on the road, but as far as getting other people more involved, I mean, it's an option. I just think I'm going to try and do this without throwing anyone completely under the bus or burning coaching contacts. When a coaching staff has a weak link in recruiting, and I'm not just talking about like everyone's going to be graded on a curve. Like Luke Fickell's a great example. When Luke Fickell was here with like that Tressel staff at the very end, he was like the ace recruiter. He was the man, and Luke is a good recruiter, but he was like the star recruiter. But he was on a staff of like bad recruiters. When Urban came in and he brings in guys that can recruit, the Zach Smiths of the world, the Stan Draytons of the world, and then obviously into his next wave of guys. But like when Urban comes in and brings in guys who can recruit, all of a sudden Fickell's not like the greatest recruiter ever known to man. He's just kind of one of the other good recruiters on their staff. And so I say that to say, when you have a clear weak link on the coaching staff as a recruiter, and Ohio State's had situations like that in the past, it weighs heavily on the other assistants. They complain about it privately. They don't say anything. Of course, they're not going to say anything publicly. They complain about it privately. Whether it's to other coaches, whether it's to people like me, whether it's to the head coach, it strains the entire staff. Because again, if you've got Mike Vrabel having to close Jamarco Jones instead of recruiting, defensive linemen and defensive players, when you have Larry Johnson, who historically never touches like other positions, basically, when you have him having to help you with Isaiah Prince, it creates like resentment. It spreads guys thin. It doesn't go well with the rest of the staff. So that's something you have to think about. Yeah, I mean, so that's a question I can't really answer. Like, I'm not in the meetings. Certainly, I can ballpark what Ohio State sells kids on, but like, I can't tell you what Alabama's meetings look like. I've never been in a meeting with Alabama or anything like that, but I don't think the facilities, I think in this day and age, the facilities argument, like we had this big facilities armor. I'm going to tangent a little bit, but I'm addressing the question here, but we had a 10, 15 year facilities arms race. I'm not going to say it's over because there's always going to be schools out there who think they can kind of put lipstick on a pig and, oh, if we just build this gorgeous facility, it doesn't matter that we haven't put guys in the NFL or, whatever. But the facilities arms race has, I don't say it's dead. I'm going to say it's cooled off quite a bit. Kids, once you reach a baseline of like, okay, like these facilities are good. They don't have to be like the best. If you're like in the top 25, most kids aren't going to base their decision off of that. They're going to look at obviously NIL, but they're going to look at, are you competing for championships? Are you building my brand? Like, is playing here going to build my brand? Is playing here going to help me get to the NFL? And facilities are like, at this point, like, I think there was like a 10-year window where like everyone tried to like shock and awe kids with like facilities and water slides and other shit. And now with NIL, especially now, like kids are like, okay, yeah, you got a water park or whatever, you got a miniature golf court, whatever. But like, what's my NIL package? Who are you sending to the NFL? Are we competing in the playoffs? Like, those are the real questions at this point. So like, I don't think that's the thing that like Alabama's winning on. Again, this is going to sound vague, but it's unfortunate. Like, but it's the truth. I don't know how to make it any more precise. Alabama's selling their ability to develop NFL offensive linemen better than Ohio State and Tennessee. And that's fine. Like, okay, yeah, you're going to lose the kids from Georgia to Alabama and Georgia. Okay. I think everyone, even the most ardent Ohio State fan, I think can stomach that to an extent of like, yeah, the 5-star kid from Atlanta went to Alabama or Georgia. Like, okay. But when the 5-star kid from Las Vegas and the 5-star kid from Charlotte are going to Tennessee, and Tennessee has clearly done a better job of convincing those kids that they'll get them to the NFL, when the last 30 years would show that's not true. That's a very big problem. Not to beat the dead horse on that. That's a very big problem. Well, I appreciate that. I hope everyone is enjoying this. This is a little different format. I know Kevin and I will jump on one here probably this week and just, do the normal format. But I want to do a live show. We've been wanting to do a live show for a while, and this felt like an appropriate time because of the Twitter discourse yesterday and maybe some points that weren't able to be made in a 250 character tweet, which I know Twitter now has like 800 characters or something, but let's be honest. Sorry, Elon, if you're listening, you're probably not, but nobody does the see more and reads the whole tweet. They stop at the cutoff. So this I think was a better platform to kind of have discussions. Yeah. I mean, no, nothing. I mean, I don't really have much to add there, but you win. You still, despite all the ways college football is changing, has changed, you still win by protecting your quarterback and causing duress for the opponent's quarterback. Like, you still win games on the offensive and defensive line. And if you can't impact games on the offensive and defensive line, you're not going to win a national championship. Doesn't matter how good your skill is. Yeah, I mean, that goes kind of back to a lot of what I've talked about today. Driving home your convincing kids of your vision. Tennessee did a better job of that. Yes. So I reached out about that the third week of July, and I was like, I reached out to some Ohio State people about that, and I just said, like, hey, I didn't get the whole vacation thing, which Day eventually kind of admitted to. What I kind of got back was, no, there's not going to be a big recruiting weekend, but we're going to bring in some guys who, kind of more personalized. And that did happen a little bit. Like they brought in some 2026 guys, some key guys there, and kind of had some more personalized individual things. But I do think certainly in hindsight, that was a mistake. Now, do they get David Sanders on camp? I mean, they still could have hosted David Sanders. I'm sure they tried to host David Sanders. So clearly the Tennessee visit at the end helped tremendously for them, but I mean, I don't have much to debate you on that. I think that's a fair comment. Yeah, I mean, it's the one position where I just hate putting it, like, even like people thought I was crazy, like with Paris Johnson, like, let's give Paris a year. Let's not, like, it's Paris Johnson. He's the number 3 player in America. He's the best offensive tackle prospect since Orlando Pace in Ohio. And all that was true, but it's just such a different beast for offensive linemen. Like the body getting to where it needs to be, both either whether it's losing weight, whether it's putting on weight, and like David Sanders or Paris Johnson's case, putting on weight. There are so many things. And then you throw into the fact, like, okay, like if I'm Jeremiah Smith, for example, because he's going to have a great freshman year. If I'm Jeremiah Smith playing in South Florida, I'm going against 6-foot corners who are track stars every week. Every Friday night, I am seeing a physical profile that will somewhat resemble what I'm going to see in the Big Ten. If I'm David Sanders, other than maybe a couple of off weeks, they'll play Weddington. I think this week they may have even played them. They'll play Weddington. He'll get a look there, but most weeks David Sanders is going against kids who are 6 feet tall, 6'1", 230 pounds, probably run 5 flat 40s. May go play Division II ball somewhere. The number of Friday nights that David Sanders or Paris Johnson, even playing in a very good league, is going against like 6'5", 270-pound monsters that run like 4.6 40s, are like never. Like it just, so there is such an adjustment to what you're seeing that even other freshmen don't have. Kind of as I laid out, like the Jeremiah Smith thing, like he's going against 5'11", 6-foot corners that run 4.4, 4.5 40s. Like it's a shock, but it's not the same shock that like an offensive lineman is going to have. Yeah, I mean, look, Bama is like notorious, and I do this every year in like March. Someone will tell me either on Twitter or on our message board. I don't say this to make fun of them. It just kind of happens. Like someone will come at me and say, what's going on with Alabama? They've only got 2 or 3 commitments. I'm like, get back to me in like Thanksgiving. Like Alabama recruiting starts in October. Like even with NIL now, it's still kind of like doesn't even start until July. Like some schools are kind of the opposite of that. Would it be better? Obviously, yes. You would like to see Ohio State get the Von Bell, the Jeff Okuda, whatever, the late big splash. And they did a couple of years ago. They had a really nice finish. They had Caden Curry and there's defensive linemen. But yeah, I mean, Ohio State's generally a start fast and kind of progressively build through the summer. And then generally their class is full and they take a couple of big swings at the end. And if they hit them, everyone's really happy. And if they miss them, everyone forgets about the first 20 kids they landed and remembers the last 3 they didn't. To me, like I'm a results guy. So like whether they get 25 guys 12 months before signing day and don't get anybody else, or whether they don't get anybody and then they get 25 guys from October through the middle of December, just line them up at the end and tell me where they stand. Like I don't get as frustrated with that as maybe the fans do, but your guess is as good as mine, Charles. They're going to have it's a total reshuffle. They're trying to get Javon McFadden. I would imagine they're going to re-kick some tires. Here's the problem, and and again, this is the opposite of damage control. So I don't know. It's like some people weren't, I don't think, reading my words correctly yesterday. This is the opposite of damage control. When you miss on David Sanders and you've already missed on Douglas Utu and you're not able to get into the game with Michael Fasusi, like your options at that point, like I mentioned this earlier. So Charles, I don't know if you were on at the very beginning. Like there's no plan B for David Sanders. There's no plan B for Jeremiah Smith. Like you either get those guys or you don't. And if you don't, like you're in the 3-star plan B, plan C pool, because all the 4-star guys you've either already landed or they've committed somewhere else and you're going to have to try and flip them now. So like I said on Twitter yesterday, like this is a total reshuffle. You need to double back on guys that maybe were close to being takes that weren't. You need to double back on guys who have committed elsewhere that you wanted to take and you just didn't get them, and see if maybe they've had a change of heart, or keep an eye on that the next 2 to 3 months as the coaching carousel goes crazy. Try and see if there's changes of heart there. And then again, senior film. I think some high school seasons have started, like they played maybe a game. But most seasons will have kicked off by like next weekend. So immediately, like with Huddle now, like kids' film is up. If a kid plays Friday night, by like 10 a.m. Saturday morning, you're going to be able to watch this film in almost every case. So immediately, like, and this is where like Marc Pantoni and his whole staff under all people under that whole vertical, this is where they come in big. They've got to be, because Justin Frye, regardless of your criticism of Justin Frye cannot coach his offensive line through fall camp and watch like 500 offensive line films on Huddle. So like now, like Pantoni's group's going to come in and they're going to watch hundreds of offensive linemen, and they're going to elevate the ones to Frye that he needs to watch. And that's how the next few weeks are going to go. Like I said, I wish I could sit here and be like, oh yeah, here's a list of 5 or 6 guys that are 1000% or the next, but like when you miss on David Sanders, there's only one David Sanders. There's not even 2 David Sanders in this class nationally. There's one David Sanders. There's one Jeremiah Smith. So. I agree with that. I think that's fair. Like, I think you said it perfectly, actually. I think it's not about like the glitz and like all the shiny, cool things. And yeah, it's about, are you getting them to your campus to spend one-on-one time with them? Are you getting them around potential classmates to build those relationships? Get Tavian St. Clair in there and get him going, doing his thing. That's the important part. Whether it's barbecue or wiffle ball or water park or mini golf, that's kind of irrelevant. It's just getting them around and feeling comfortable with your campus, feeling comfortable with your program. Yeah, I mean, Chris Henry committed at their. I think that was the info. Kevin's in here, pushing questions through, but yeah, that was, I was gonna say, that's the wiffle ball, right? Yep, yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think a late July event makes a lot of sense. Doesn't matter what it is. The Friday Night Lights thing kind of ran its course. Kids aren't camping with official visits in June. Kids aren't camping at the end of July. And even like the underclassmen, could you turn that into like an underclassmen deal or just like all young guys? You could, but by the end of July now, like a lot of guys are like locked in on their high school seasons. It just becomes like the landscape has changed. So you kind of had to like the camp thing, the whole Friday Night Lights camp thing, I think had run its course. But yeah, there's the event thing is great. I mean, they had they had a lot of their 26s on campus together. I think it was last year. So, yeah, I agree. Okay. There's one there about the centers. Like the center's been good, but offensive tackle, I can't see. Let me see the whole thing here. Push that. There we go. Yeah. Very good center talent as of recently, but as far as OT or guard depth, we have been severely under recruiting and therefore underperforming, which is unacceptable. 5-star left OT wins games. Well, I certainly can't disagree with not having enough tackle depth. I certainly can't disagree with having franchise left tackles being a good thing. Yeah, I mean, here it's easier to have interior depth. I will say this, while I agree with you kind of the past couple of years on guard, I think this year they have interior depth. I think they have a lot of it. I think Austin Searveld is going to be a very good player at Ohio State. Not to pat myself on the back, I've been screaming for like 4 years now that Tegra is a guard, not a tackle. So that's helped. Hinsman's now a guard, which is what he played in high school. So that's helping. Luke Montgomery, like they have guard depth now. I would agree in years past, certainly like last year, maybe in the year before, their guard depth was not good at all. So there were several from recruiting misses to, Harry Miller's retirement and his situation. Like there's a lot of things that kind of went into that, but I agree with that. But I do think the guard depth has changed. Now, it's kind of inexcusable to not have center and guard depth because you can recruit. So you could recruit all offensive tackles, say. You could recruit only offensive tackles because you can always move tackles to guard and sometimes center too, but you can always bump tackles in. So if you're recruiting good tackle bodies, you should naturally, even if you don't have depth at tackle, you should naturally find yourself with depth inside. But I agree. I mean, the depth hasn't been there and it needs to change. Throw up the Sanders thing. Throw up the yes. Yeah, I've acknowledged this is what Tennessee offered. But I'm telling you that Ohio State was going to match that. I'm telling you that Ohio State was competitive with their NIL offer. I'm telling you he would have got 7 figures at Ohio State. I'm telling you that all the people at Ohio State that always complain whenever they lose a kid about NIL are not saying that. I'm telling you that preemptively all those people who say that were telling me they weren't going to lose this one over NIL. This was not an NIL loss. That's become the go-to de facto excuse whenever a school loses a kid is NIL. They did not lose David Sanders over NIL. Now, I'm not going to call David Sanders a mama's boy, but I 1,000% agree that geography helped Tennessee. It's initially why I was the last one to the party on David Sanders. I spent the first year telling everyone not to worry about David Sanders. They weren't going to get him. Now, April, May, June kind of changed my stance because they kept getting him back on campus and we spent some time with David at his school and just things had 180. The people at Ohio State who were even telling me this is a pipe dream were like, no, we're in this one now. Like, so, in the end, wrong, but I agree with you. Geography helped Tennessee, but this was two-pronged. This was geography, and this was Tennessee doing a better job of selling David Sanders on their offensive line development, on their plan for him on the field than Ohio State. And that part is kind of the geography thing is what it is. But the part where, Tennessee did a better job of selling David on the plan is just, it's kind of cringy. Yeah, it's a great game day environment. I don't, but again, I think it kind of goes into the facilities category of like, if you've got a really good game day environment, that's just, there's like a baseline you need to have. And certainly Ohio State has that. But like, decisions aren't made of like, well, I think this school's got the best game day environment, and this school's only got like the third or fourth best game day environment, so I'm going to this school. It's like, well, that's not a huge factor, but no doubt. I mean, my uncle lives in Knoxville. So I'm probably more familiar with the Tennessee football program than I should be, but it's a great environment. I don't think that was a huge factor in what David did. Yeah, I don't think that's true. Yeah, I certainly haven't been told that. So unless maybe he's got a new girlfriend. Maybe he found a girlfriend on that last week in July. That wouldn't be the first time that ever happened in the history of recruiting. We wasted far too much time and had NIL set aside, and now we're up to backup plan. Again, I will say, like, there's no backup plan for David Sanders. There's no backup plan for Jeremiah Smith. Like, it's hard. Again, if you want to say they should have offered 10 or 15 more kids, that's fine. But the kind of the reality is, as you kind of go look, if you go like look through their offer lists, I'll bring one up on my screen so I can read these off to you. So I'm not just flailing here trying to remember all the names, but like if you look at their offensive tackle offer list, so you've got Douglas Utu. They were not holding off Douglas Utu. They were not holding off Ty Haywood. They were not holding off Braden Jacobs, Mason Short, like Michael Fasusi. Like, it's not like they were like, oh, let's not worry about those guys. Let's put all our chips on it. Like, they missed on all those guys too. Like, and that's not damage control. That's more damning than saying, yeah, they just put all their eggs in one basket. That's damage control. What's not damage control is saying, well, it only feels like they did that because they've already missed on all the other guys they wanted, with the exception, of course, of Carter Lowe, who, by the way, I feel like obligated to say this. Whatever we do with Frye and O-line recruiting, let's appreciate Carter Lowe for a minute. This is a top 50 prospect. Possibly, some people have him as a 5-star. I would not disagree with that. Let's at least make sure we don't disrespect Carter Lowe in all this, because he's a future like franchise tackle too. So let's make sure we don't forget he's there. Do you think Jermiel Atkins? I think everyone deserves a second look at this point. I think Green is probably a guard. The guys that are interesting to me from that list for Ohio State, Nolan Davenport's guy I've kind of liked as like a top 20 player in Ohio. He's put on a lot of weight, which he needed to do, but you never know how that's going to go. Like, sometimes guys put on a ton of weight and it doesn't matter. Like, they're still athletic, because he was a tight end at one point. And then sometimes guys put on weight they have to put on to play the position, but they lose a little bit of flexibility, a little bit of agility. And so they can't really play tackle anymore. They have to play guard. Like, has that happened with Davenport? I don't know. But yeah, like, I like Nolan. And the guy I like as like a definite tackle from your list there is Jermiel Atkins. It's like 6'7", like 300 pounds, like can move, plays basketball. I think that's a guy I would take a close look at. I'm actually surprised his recruitment didn't go a little more crazy. Just because of the need for offensive tackles out there, that he kind of fits the profile. I'm surprised he didn't maybe get more big offers. He's also a very quiet kid. I don't know how much he really did visits and stuff. He kind of keeps to himself. So I don't know if that made some schools nervous. Everyone wants these like type A's and like when you meet a type B, like college coaches, like don't like they in their mind, oh, they can't wrap their brains around a type B being a good football player. I've seen them pass on kids over this a lot. So I don't know if that has impacted his recruitment at all, but that's a guy I would be looking very closely at. Do you think Charles Bentley would join the staff to help development so Frye can focus more on recruiting? I don't see why he wouldn't. Yeah, and Kevin, so now, yeah, I mean, what Kevin is saying here is a valid point. I kind of have I think to what the question was, I think there would be a workaround, but yeah, so they had that dreaded, oh, I'm sorry. Like if you have PTSD over some of this stuff, you can mute me for like 2 minutes. They had that dreaded Tommy Brown, Chris Carter, is it Underwood? And I'm missing somebody. Who's the kid from I'm missing another one. Bobeck. No, it's another Ohio kid, I thought. Anyway, yeah. They had Bobeck wasn't really in the LaCharles, I don't think. Yes. No, not Tommy Ferris. Tommy Brown, Chase Ferris, that was a different one. But it was Tommy Brown, Chris Carter, I think Antonio, maybe it was just those three. And they offered and took all those kids early. They were all working with LaCharles Bentley up in Northeast Ohio, and he recommended them to Bowman. Bowman just, yep, whatever you say, offered, took them all early. Everyone knew they couldn't play. Everyone said at the time, we said it as nicely as we could at the time. These guys aren't Ohio State good. That turned out to be, unfortunately, very correct. And yes, LaCharles was kind of working those guys out in Northeast Ohio. That being said, the scenario laid out there wasn't LaCharles shopping for the groceries. And let's be honest here, when you run something like that, when you're training guys, your livelihood kind of depends on getting those kids noticed by colleges. Like people are paying you to train them, but they're kind of paying you to advocate for them as well. So you benefit tremendously if you can get your guys who pay you to train them to go to Ohio State or Notre Dame or Michigan, whatever. If you would take that out of the equation and now he doesn't have an O-line academy that he's focused on, if his job is just developing Ohio State football players, I think that takes a lot of the BS out of it. And so, that it becomes more viable at that point, but I don't know if that's been a discussion or anything. Why only 29? Yeah, I've got him at like 30 or 31, but yeah, that's semantics. Well, I mean, yeah, that's a question we've talked about. Should they have offered 10 or 15 more? Would those 10 or 15 more offers be committable? Probably not. Alabama's offered 45, 50, whatever it is. But Alabama didn't need to go 40, 50 deep on their board. They went like 5 deep on they got 3 of probably their top 4 or 5 players on their board. So I go back to the root of this, which is if you offer 28 out-of-state players and you get 0 of them, I just think there are 5 or 6 other questions that are the most important questions to ask and answer before we get to, well, why didn't you offer, you missed on 28. Why didn't you offer 38 or 48? Like you've already missed on 28. Like that's the problem. But 29, I mean, it's not a great year in Ohio. 26 is. So they've already offered more Ohio kids in 26 than in 25. They weren't going to, and this changes, I think now, again, we've talked about this a little bit, the 85 to 105 scholarship limit, I think maybe changes some math for people. But when they initially started the cycle, I think people are like, oh, they're going to take like 6. They're not going to take 6. The quality of 26, the need for probably a portal body after this offseason, and the relative quality depth on the interior of the offensive line right now did not warrant taking like 6 when you had 85 scholarships. What I figured and was kind of told they were going to do is take like 4 and then maybe go in the portal after the season for like a 5th. So they were never going to take like 6 or 7 off. Now next year they should. Next year they take 7. I think I usually take 7 or 8 if they can. That convincing that many is probably a separate issue, but so I think it was a combination of what they were going to take, Ohio, how they perceived Ohio in the surrounding states, and again they've missed on. I just did the tackles. Like I just went through the tackles. I won't bore you guys with that. They missed on Avery Gatch. I mean, they've missed on a lot of players. So now when they miss on Sanders, it looks like, oh, they waited and waited and waited for Sanders and did nothing in the meantime. Like, no, they missed on all those guys too. Sanders was just kind of the last domino to fall. And now they've missed on him too. Like it's I don't want to say fitting because that's kind of mean, but like it's an ironic finish to a 3-month period where they've basically struck out. So, that's just kind of the reality of the situation. I mean, I'm not sugarcoating. I don't think I'm being over the top critical either. I think it's just the reality. Their recruiting class is still first or second in the country, depending on who you ask. They are about to, in a year where they absolutely had to reload on defense, they're about to sign, in my opinion, the best defensive class in the country. Their quarterback is the number 1 recruit in America now. And oh, by the way, like you guys haven't had a bad season in like 20 years. So you got that going for you. You got a lot of things going for you. It's going to be okay. You guys are like maybe the Pittsburgh Steelers are a bad example now since, as an Eagles fan, I have to get this jab in. They haven't won a playoff game in like 8 years. But you guys are kind of like what the Steelers were from like 1980 to 2010. You might not win a Super Bowl every year, but you're freaking in the playoffs every year. So you guys are okay. You're doing okay. Anything else? Stud offered Dawayne Jones at the very end of the cycle after he had struck out on a whole bunch of other players at the recommendation of Kevin Wilson, who recruited to Indianapolis for Ohio State. Sure, he got Dawayne Jones. So certainly possible he ends up elsewhere. Not a done deal yet. So I was asked this on the chat maybe a couple weeks ago. And what I said on the board was, I'm not counting him out yet. But if you sit here today and you ask me, like, Ohio State's going to lose 1 commitment from this class. It's going to happen. There's nothing you can do to stop it. It's happening. Who do you think is the most likely player that would fit that bill? I think it's probably Mathis. Obviously, Penn State's continuing to try and keep him somewhat close to home. There has been some speculation. I always hate this because I can't see transcripts. I can only go off what people are saying. So I want to frame this as pure speculation at this point. There's been a little speculation that he's got to make sure he stays on the books here as he closes out his high school career. That's something to monitor. So we'll see. I think if nothing else to keep him away from Penn State, I don't think they're just going to let him go. I'll put it that way, without a fight. I think they've got a decent chance of keeping him, but yeah, I think he's definitely, for me, if you ask me, like, okay, who's the first guy comes to your mind of they could lose this guy between now and Sunday? It's probably Zahir. I think generally speaking, the offer is the offer for, like, I think Ohio State's got a little bit of wiggle room with some of this stuff, but I don't think they get too much in the game of like, we're offering you this and then we're offering you that. Oh, no, we're going to offer you this. I think it's generally of you get put in like one of two buckets. So like bucket one is, this is what your value is to us. And like, that's it. Like, that's take it or leave it. Or like, hey, we're going to take care of this. Just let us know. And that's kind of like the Jeremiah Smith, David Sanders bucket. So I don't know that there's like this huge constant back and forth of like they're constantly upping the ante on these guys. I don't think a lot of those guys work that way. But do you think Bella's the next commit? Could be. Again, if you're on the site, I have for a while felt they could get Phillip Bell. My question has always been, is Phillip Bell right at the top of the wish list with guys like, DeCorey Moore, obviously, Jamie French, those types of guys, Vernell Brown. And my instinct at times is that Ohio State's not been sure. And now that I think some of these other pieces have come together, or some of these moves have played out, I think it's very possible, if not most likely, that he is. But we'll see. The one thing I always am a little skeptical of is, has Phillip got the vibe that they're unsure? Because if that's happened with Phillip, that throws things off a little bit. But as long as they've been consistent in communicating with Phillip, which I think they have, very gettable. What else we got? Oh, boy. Yeah, I initially thought 26, 27 for the class. Then the 105 thing came through, and it's like, well, you're going to add maybe a couple for that, which I think they've already baked in. Like, I think they've already taken a couple guys knowing, like, we're going to take this guy no matter what. We're still going to recruit, like Bod Miller, like, for example, is a good example of that. Like, they really like him. I'm not saying he's just like a, some plan C guy. They really like him, but they weren't going to fill like a spot with him, as far as like, they weren't going to be, well, now that we got him, we don't need Jamie French, Phillip Bell, DeCorey. Like, we don't need to do that. Like, no, that's just like, we're taking him as like one of our extras to slowly get to this 105. And we'll still, all the other guys who previously had spots before Bod committed still have a spot. I think Jay Cook is the same thing. Anyone that had a spot previous to Jay Cook still has a spot. He didn't take anybody's spot. This was kind of, hey, we got to get some more bodies here, because as I mentioned earlier, it's going to be very interesting the next 3 years to see how teams get to 105. Because one way I don't think you can do this, glad to see Alabama or Georgia try to prove me wrong on this, is I don't think you can take 45 kids instead of 25 kids and be like, oh, we're at 105 now. Because that's a great way to have 35 kids from your freshman class hit the transfer portal after their first year, and now you're 45 below again the scholarship total. You're going to have to gradually get to 105. Like, you're going to have to, like, five extra a year for like 3 cycles, get to 105, while probably giving some walk-ons scholarships in the meantime, like senior walk-ons scholarships in the meantime for guys that have earned it, as opposed to just like snapping your fingers, taking 45 guys in one class. That's just terrible for roster balance. It's not going to work. So that's going to be interesting to see how teams figure that out. And quite frankly, unless I've missed something in the reports, or my understanding is that this is like kind of a 85 one day. Oh, now we're at 105. What I think should have been done is, okay, we're at 85 in 2024. You could have 90 and 25, 95 and 26, 127, and by 28 we're at 105, and then we're 105. I think that would have been better for pretty much everyone involved, because if you're Ohio State, you can't get to 105 right away because you're just going to take 45 kids. 10 of them probably can't play for you anyway. They're all going to transfer out after the first year because they're going to be so far down the depth chart. Like, it's not workable. If you're like a financially constricted program, like if you're Kent State, you can't just add 20 scholarships to your roster overnight. You barely can pay for 85. Like, there's probably years you're happy if you break fall camp with 75 because you don't have to pay 10 other scholarships. Like, so I don't know how that's. My understanding is it's just gonna be a clean, like, we're 85 now and then tomorrow we're at 105. But I really think that should have been thought out a little bit more clearly if they were going to do that. Yeah, that's probably above my my pay grade and my education level. The one thing I would say is, like, okay, so Ohio State tuition has skyrocketed since I was there like 15, 20 years ago. Let's just use an even number. I don't know what the tuition is now. It's a lot, but let's say tuition's $30,000 a year. If you're the school, like, you're not really paying $30,000 a year per kid. It's not like you're like paying for it. You're just kind of, it's being subsidized by like all the kids who are paying is like the general, like, so like, it's not like you're writing a check to yourself or to, like, you're not like cutting a check for $30,000 for each scholarship athlete. So it's not quite there. It's a little more complex than that. But yeah, like for Ohio State, I mean, Ohio State's essentially $1 billion corporation. I mean, let's call it what it is at this point. Like, that's not going to be a problem. And you may see like a men's diving team, or, you may see a sport, that's go away. I mean, that's probably going to happen. Ohio State's trying very hard not to, but you're seeing it in other schools. So some schools are going to cut some non-rev sports to get there. And then again, like, I hate to beat on Kent State, but I don't know how Kent State's going to do that. I don't. I can make a case for why this would actually help them in terms of having more bodies that around that aren't going to just up and leave for the transfer portal. But I don't know where, like, financially, like, I go up there every now and then, and like, I don't exaggerate when I tell you that Kent State has worse facilities than Massillon, Washington. Kent State has worse facilities than Carrollton, Georgia. Kent State has worse facilities than probably Kevin, maybe 100 Texas high schools, if not more. Where they're going to figure this out, I don't know. I say this jokingly, but it's kind of true. Like, walking into Kent State's facility and walking into like Dublin Kaufman's facility is like the exact same. Like, there's not much difference. So I don't know where a program like that figures this out. Probably cutting sports is probably the unfortunate answer. Well, I mean, that's certainly, if you're an Ohio State fan, that's certainly the hope. My response to that would be, why not both? Why not have Sanders at left and Lowe at right? But, oh, excuse me. Been holding that one off for 10 minutes. Yeah. So I would, you hope so. We'll see. Yeah. What's Robert? I like the Robert Howard comment. Might be a good place to go there. Yeah. Yeah, and that goes back to what we talked about at the beginning of the show. The criteria is finishing 25, O-line play the next 5 months, and do not sit here on January 1st and not have any O-line commitments in 26. Not with 3 in-state offers, not with Deron Parks, who essentially considers himself an Ohio kid, not with Champ Smith, who you lead for. That's not a guess. That's Champ telling me both on and off the record Ohio State's in the driver's seat. Not for Iheanacho, who you're in. Maybe I don't know if you lead, but boy, are you in that. Like, you cannot come to Ryan Day on January 1st and be like, yeah, sorry, Ryan, I haven't got any O-line commits yet. If OSU ends with 2 O-linemen in 25, and the offensive line isn't like a major, like top 2 or 3 reason why Ohio State's winning or competing for a national championship, yeah, I don't think you can, and I don't think they will. Yeah, I see. I throw up what Christopher's saying about Sanders, just because I know he's mentioned this a couple times. Oh, well, that one too. I was talking about the Sanders, but this one's good too. Yes, Emmanuel Iheanacho is 1,000% interested in Ohio State, and are they leading? If you told me you think Ohio State's leading, I'm not going to really argue with you. But they're in the top 2 or 3. I mean, they're up there very, very high, 1,000%. But yeah, he said something about, yeah. I have so rarely watched an offensive lineman run like a tight end at like 280 pounds. And Sanders he's a unicorn. He's so tall and long. You kind of wonder where else it might work. But if he kept his weight down, it could probably be who's the big kid for Georgia? Darnell Washington. He could kind of be that. And yeah, he could play the end. Yeah, he could. So the short answer is kind of yes. If you're not on the board, you've never heard this. If you're on the board, sorry, you're going to hear this again. What I've been saying for a couple of years now, really since the beginning of NIL, and I think it's only been reinforced by what we've seen the last couple of years. Eventually, there's not really going to be NIL. Eventually, the schools are going to directly pay the players. Like, whether that encompasses them being employees or contract, I don't know. I can't sit here. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to sit here and give you the entire structure of how it may come together. But what I can tell you is that we are moving very quickly within the next, I think, 3 to 5 years toward the money flowing directly from the school to the player, and essentially the collectives. I don't think the collectives will vanish. I think the collectives will probably just take on some type of different fundraising role in some capacity. But that's where this is heading, and that's where all the coaches tell me it's heading. So I think that's basically answering your question. But when that happens, yes, I think that there will be some type of limit on that. What that's going to be, I don't know. They could go like full NHL and do like a salary floor. Like, if you're going to be in Division I, you need to pay this much to your talent. If you're with a floor and a cap, I'm not sure exactly what it's going to look like, but I think eventually, it is what it is. Yeah. And I think, look, again, as I kind of mentioned before, he can't call Champ. So he hasn't been able to call Champ. Like in the summer, you can't do that with 26s. But what needs to be happening if it's not, and I talk to Champ a lot, so I've got a good pulse on that one. Like, that's like, I'd like to sit here and say, like, we'd all like to sit here, like all of us do this. We've got the exact same insight into every kid Ohio State's recruiting. It's not always true. Like, some kids, you're in better with than others. Champ would be like very much toward the top of my list as far as guys that I have the pulse on. But yeah, you have to be more aggressive. Like during the time when before you're allowed to actually call these guys, you need to be calling the high school coach. You need to be telling the high school coach, I need to talk to Champ, Johnny, whoever. When can you bring him into your office? After school, before school, study hall, lunch break, whatever. And I need 15 minutes on the phone with this guy. If that's not happening in mass across the Ohio State staff for 2026, if that hasn't been happening, in the spring, or you call a coach on the cell phone and be like, hey, you guys have weightlifting this morning. When weightlifting is over, I'm calling your cell phone and can you put Champ on? Like this is not hard. It's not hard to get around. Like I don't have time for the excuses of, well, we can't contact the underclassmen. Well, yes, you can. You just can't call their cell phone. Not although other schools are doing that, but you can't. Okay, you want to play by the rules? Fine. Call the high school coach, text the high school coach, set something up. It's not hard. There's really no excuse for it. Yeah, and it felt like he was trending heavily toward an offer. Alford obviously leaves. My instinct on that is that Lachlan wants to see a few games of junior film. But that's when you're a new coach at a new place, you're coming across the country, and we're talking about offering local talent. I think you're going to be a little slow naturally, because the last thing you want to do is come in and just blow up local recruiting the first 3 months, like make mistakes, offer kids you shouldn't, don't offer kids that you should, ruin relationships with coaches, ruin relationships with kids. Like I think the first few months on a new job like this, especially at this type of place, you're like, you want to get comfortable with what the landscape is. So I think, again, with 26, let's not get nuts on 26 yet. These kids have not played a down of their junior seasons. And you're Ohio State. Let's remember you're Ohio State for a second. You're not Kent. You're not Akron. You're not Louisville. You're not Cincinnati. You're Ohio State. You're recruiting the best players in America. You may not know who they are before their junior season. Like, guys get a lot better sophomore to junior year. A lot better. There's a lot of guys who we don't even talk about right now who didn't play varsity last year, who are going to emerge as like 50 offer kids this year. So let's see, let's at least give it till the end of September. Let's let these guys play 5-6 games of their high school junior year. That way, Ohio State has obviously evaluated them at that point, their junior film. There's no excuse anymore. You see what you're seeing. And then let's see where they're at. And let's see, okay, are they offering enough guys? What are they missing on some guy? Let's at least let the junior seasons kick off. It's not a denial of anything that you're saying. It's not a denial of anything anyone's saying as far as offers, but let's I know patience is not a thing anymore, but let's at least for 26, let's at least see where things are at on September 30th. Can we do that? Yeah. Just cheeseburgers. That's all it was, right? I don't know what that is. Is that a defense of Michigan? I don't. It's either a defense of Michigan or it's amazing sarcasm, one or the other. I'm not sure. And to me, that's going to be a cool thing, an interesting thing, at least, to watch the next 4 or 5 years, is how, again, we know the end game is that the money is going to flow from school to player directly versus indirectly now through the collectives. The cool part, or the interesting part, maybe not cool for some of you, the interesting part is going to be how they arrive at that, what the system actually looks like, because the devil, of course, as you guys know, the devil's in the details. So we know what the end game's going to be. We just don't. What are the details going to be, and are they going to be good or bad or whatever? I'm not going to peg Ohio State for a 27 quarterback yet. Brady Edmonds is very good, though. I don't know that Nathan Bernard is exactly what they're looking for. I think there's a belief that he may not fit what they want as far as just like the quick feet. But and I don't mean like 4.5 40. I mean like the quickness. Like Julian Sayin has extremely quick feet. He may not run a 4.3, but he's got extremely quick feet. I don't know. Let's put it this way. I have not heard anything that would lead me to believe an offer there is imminent. Now, that was like 10 quarterbacks committing somewhere else ago. So, again, maybe revisit that after they've watched some junior film. And now, I got Kelly in there involved in this too. Maybe he feels differently. That just hasn't felt super close to me. But things like that can change very quickly. So I would have to see what they're actually at right now in 26. You're going to see a flurry of offers starting mid to late September, and it's just going to continue through like April on 26. Like it's just going to, whatever it is now, I can almost assure you it's going to like triple or quadruple, I would think, on 26, between now and say the spring game. 25, there's usually like a handful, like maybe, I mean real offers. Like they may throw out 25 or 30 offers to seniors. How many of them they're going to be super serious about? Usually is somewhere between 5 and 10, and they usually get a couple of them. I mean, it's not a thing where they're getting 15 guys that they've offered their senior years, but there's always one or two that just kind of blow. Like Jahmyr Gibbs was a late bloomer that went from like no one knew who he was to like the most coveted like late signing period guy of the cycle. So like there's going to be guys like that. There's going to be in-state guys that get better. You're going to have, a handful to a couple of handfuls. It doesn't feel like it. I hate saying like never on stuff like that or like no, but I think they had a specific plan for a 3 running back class that included Jordan Davison. And once while Jordan Davison isn't Jeremiah Smith or David Sanders, he is a fantastic player, and you're not just going to plug that spot with anybody. So I think they're going to be extremely, extremely selective about considering a 3rd running back. I think that plan kind of blew up when they lost Jordan Davison. Julian Sayin's size is concerning me, especially if we want to run the QB more for the line recruiting. I don't know if they want to necessarily run the QB more as much as they want the quarterback to have the ability to escape and scramble. I don't, with Will Howard, you're going to play to his strengths. He's a big bruising kid, so you're going to run some QB power there because, quite frankly, that's, in my opinion, kind of what he's best at, is that and kind of play action. And he's a very different player than like CJ Stroud, obviously. Like, so I think with Julian, it's more of we want you to have the athleticism to escape, extend plays, scramble for first downs. I don't think you're going to see them like go JT Barrett and get Julian into 20 car crashes every Saturday just to prove a point. I think Julian's going to do a lot of his damage with his arm. Yeah, I mean, so Ohio State's philosophy, and it's never perfect, right? Because you're going to offer kids too early. Unfortunately, you are going to do that. You are going to throw out some offers to placate people. You're going to go into maybe a place like Buford or IMG Academy or something like that, and you're going to maybe offer more kids than you actually are interested in taking. But Ohio State has tried to avoid a situation where like 60, 70% of their offers are just nonsense. Right or wrong, that's how they've tried to operate. Again, do I think it makes a huge difference at the end of the day? I think it makes somewhat of a difference. Like, certainly if you have 100 real offers out there versus 50 real offers, like the 100 real offers is a better setup. But again, if you're Ohio State and Alabama and Georgia, you are trying to get the top of your board. Like, you're not worried about who the 200th offer is. Like, you're not even recruiting that kid. Like, Georgia's not recruiting. They've offered 45 offensive linemen. They're not recruiting half of them. They're not recruiting them. So, and if they get down that far on their board, we're going to have a situation like we have here where Ohio State fans want, Justin Frye's head on a spike. They're going to want Kirby Smart's head on a spike. If they're getting down to their 35th and 45th offers on the offensive line because they've missed on their top 10, 12, 14, whatever it is, targets. So again, I think what you're saying has merit. I think there is some merit to more offers, but I don't think it's the major symptom you're trying to fight. Yes, they are still trying to flip Brew. Do I think they got Brew, they got McNutt, and Justin Hill are like three guys are definitely trying to flip. I think they knew the deal with McNutt. They knew it wasn't going to be them this summer. He's been claiming he's going to do his official in the fall. But you suspect he's going to do some games in the fall in an unofficial capacity. They're playing the long game there. They were a little more taken off guard by Brew. And I think they'll continue to try and hammer that one home. And then, of course, you have Justin Hill as well. So those are like three flip candidates to at least keep on the back burner there. Okay. Good. I honestly do not. I'm never going to sit here and be like, oh yeah, I have just go off script and just throw something out there. I honestly do not. Not someone I've been able to see. I know he's the preferred walk on, and just haven't went down that rabbit hole yet. But let me actually do that. I know you're on the site, so I will. I'll do maybe a deep dive on that here this week and see what I can get. Chase Linton. Do we go after Chase Linton? These are always the fun questions because it's like, well, you can't really say no, but you also aren't sure it's actually yes. I think I would say no right now. I think, first of all, they feel pretty good about their defensive line class, especially on the edge. When Justin Hill committed to Alabama, it was absolutely unanimous from people I talked to at Ohio State that there wasn't a plan B for Justin Hill. Justin Hill is the plan B. So plan B for Ohio State in terms of like that type of edge body is flipping Justin Hill back. Like they're not going to give up on that one. So I think it's unlikely. It's like nothing's ever no, like 0% in recruiting, but like I would think probably not. I think Justin Hill is going to be the guy they really lock in on here. Yeah, Ralph's got a great point there to an extent. Yeah. Right. Exactly. And so to that point, does it matter if you've given an, like, so like for Alabama, Georgia, with like their 50 O-line offers, when we know 25 to 30 of them are BS, does it matter if they've offered? Why not just call the kid? Why not just call the kid once a week or once every couple of weeks and build a relationship and then offer him when you're ready? Like, I don't know that it. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you can. I think there are ways to convey your point of, we need you to visit, we need to see this out of you, we need to, without offering you first and be like, oh, by the way, you can't actually commit to this offer. Here are the hoops you have to jump through first, and then we'll tell you if you can commit to this offer or not. You can just tell them, these are the hoops we need to jump through before we even offer you, before we consider taking you. So this is where I think it's a little more complicated on the number of offers than just black and white of they should offer this many players or whatever it is. Larry could not be more serious about going after Jakeem Stewart. That is his number one priority right now. And I fully expect him to reclassify. He has tabled that conversation. We've talked to Jakeem. We've seen him in person a couple times. We actually went down and saw him on our Southern Swing in Louisiana back in May, and did his scrimmage and talked to him for a little bit after, talked to his coaches, and then they came back up, and we spent a lot of time around Jakeem here this offseason. And again, he and his coach have kind of been like, when there's something to tell you on that, we'll tell you. But privately, he's doing all the required paperwork, coursework, etc., to do that. And it would seem to be a massive waste of time for someone who his coach has quoted in my interviews with him of saying, we don't waste his time with visits, we don't waste his time with things, to not actually reclassify. So I fully expect him to reclassify, and that is Larry Johnson's number one. I mean, he thinks the world of Jakeem. I know that for a fact. I think what they're going to do right now, I mean, first of all, yeah, you're still trying to flip Justin Hill, who is more D-end than linebacker. So you're still in that phase. I think they know the score on Zahir. Like, they're not blind to like the Zahir Mathis situation. So I can tell you with like 98% certainty they've got their backup options together if they think they need another body. The way the landscape looks right now with what they have currently, and they still have Zahir right now, I don't think they're feeling like they need to bring in someone else yet, as long as Zahir's still in the class, as long as they're still trying to flip Justin Hill. And again, to go to the last thing we talked about, as long as Jakeem Stewart's still out there, because you're not recruiting Jakeem Stewart as a defensive tackle. You're recruiting Jakeem Stewart as a defensive lineman. You're not telling him you're this, you're that. They're letting him, they're just like, you're a monster. You're a defensive lineman. And so I think that, as long as all those options are still in play, I think they're going to be pretty selective on bringing anyone new. And, last thing before I jump to the next one is, again, another theme of this conversation we're having here is the roster balance from 85 to 105. You can't just bring in like 7 guys at defensive end or left tackle or outside line, but whatever you want to, you have to bring in 7 guys to get to your one of you're going to have to slowly, gradually get there. I don't think Autry's going to flip to get to this one. I don't think Autry's going to flip. They're going to try. Zion Grady's going to try. Those two train together. They meet. They're about 3.5, 4 hours apart. They meet halfway in Montgomery to train with the same person. So Zion Grady is going to continue to work that. But we're talking about a kid who grew up 15 minutes away from Auburn, whose parents have never left the state. Other than maybe a couple of these official visits, they're very small town people. And given how important he is to Auburn as well, they're going to do everything in their power to keep him. I think that's a major uphill battle. And I think the one thing that would open the door is if Auburn is an absolute dumpster fire this year, but that remains to be seen, obviously. Yeah, I don't have a great answer for that other than what I would say the obvious answer would be is that I think they probably just liked other guys more. I don't have a long, in-depth answer on that. Throw up Mika's Justin Hill comment on the Jack, if you can. So, 1,000% that, we can talk about the parents being Alabama fan, 1,000% this was a sticking point. They thought they had that covered, much like they thought they had the David Sanders geography covered. But here's the thing. They're either going to use it this fall or they're not. So if we see the Jack as much as we've seen the Jack the last few years, which is that we've barely seen it, then yeah, they're not going to flip Justin Hill. That being said, they've been telling Justin Hill for a year, really, that they're going to deploy the Jack position this year. So let's say you landed Justin Hill in July. If you then go out this fall and don't use the Jack, he's flipping to Alabama anyway. You wouldn't have signed him anyway. So they're either going to stick by what they've been telling Justin Hill, and we're going to see the Jack, which is going to give them a chance to flip him, or that was a very bad choice of a sales pitch, and we're going to find out they have no intention of using the Jack, and they're not going to flip him. So I'm inclined to believe we're going to see more of it this year. I don't know why you would make it a point to recruit Justin Hill solely for this position in a way that you haven't with any other kid the last 3 years, and then not follow through on what you're telling him, because you were going to be outed as a liar if you took his commitment in July and then went out this fall and didn't use the Jack. You were going to be outed as a liar to him anyway, and he was going to flip to Alabama. So I am inclined to believe we're going to see more of it this fall than we have. I really am. We'll see. I mean, like I said, they've been telling Justin Hill this for a year. We'll see. I'm not sure. I don't believe what coaches say about strategy in August. Remember, every August we're going to throw to the tight end more this year. And they finally did with Stover last year or 2 years ago. But remember, every August we're going to use the tight end this year. We're going to use the tight end. We're going to do that. They had that, the bullet position. They've had names for all these positions over the years, and then they don't. So will they not? Maybe they won't. I mean, maybe they'll just say, you know what, let Justin Hill go to Alabama. We're just not going to use the Jack. They have the personnel for it. I mean, Sonny Styles was born to play that position, but I don't know. We'll see. I think there are things you can glean from what the coaches say in August in terms of position battles and there's things you can glean, but in terms of what they're telling you they're going to do on the field as far as who they're going to focus on, personnel, formations, stuff like that, we get a lot of BS. So again, let's see where we're at in September. Do we offer Sincere Johnson? I like Sincere a lot. Reminds me a little bit of Arvell Reese. He's a little thicker than Arvell was coming out. Arvell was a little longer, skinnier. I would. Will they? I think he's got a good chance. I mean, only James Laurel. I don't offer kids, so I can't sit here and say yes. They're definitely James Laurel Nice makes that decision, but I think he's got a good chance. I go back to this. You're going to have to come up with 20 more scholarships over the next couple of years that you're going to have to fill. So I think you can be more aggressive with Ohio kids, developmental kids, and I would. Looks like we got some. Well, that certainly happens. That certainly happens in a lot of cases. I think I went a little deeper with that than Autry. He's very close with Zion Grady. I think Zion Grady knew he was going to Ohio State probably 2 months before he committed to Ohio State, maybe 3 months before he committed to Ohio State. We were down at Zion Grady's spring scrimmage, and we got very good vibes from him there. And it was kind of understood that wherever he committed, he was going to try and go with Malik Autry. He was going to try and flip Malik Autry there. So I think part of that was going, they visited the same weekend. I think part of that was let me check this place out with Zion. Zion's probably going here. He really likes the place. Let me take a look. But certainly, yes. I mean, it is a great way to get everyone's cards on the table, is to commit somewhere and then visit other schools. So Tennessee just flipped somebody from Alabama. Is that what the chat's saying? If I read that correctly. Interesting. Like I said, they're whatever they're doing. And look, is NIL part of what they're doing? Sure. Are we going to pretend that Alabama doesn't know what they're doing with NIL or isn't doing NIL properly? I mean, I don't think so. But yeah, I mean, whatever they're selling, kids are buying. And they're not selling the same product that a lot of that Georgia and Ohio State and Alabama are selling. So I guess kudos to them for how they're approaching things. I think so. We got super good vibes around, again, 2 months before he committed, we got super good vibes around Zion at his school. And we talked to one of his family members at the scrimmage, and I'll do this sometimes to kind of, I'm trying to gather information so I can pass information on to you guys. So one thing I'll do sometimes is a kid from Alabama, like Zion, is I'll go to a family member. I'll be like, well, there's no way Zion, kids from Alabama don't go to Ohio State. They go to Alabama and Georgia. Is this serious? He's not that serious, is he? This is kind of a curiosity trip. And they're like, oh, no. There's their last visit, they checked every box, was his best visit by far. They were more thorough than any other program. He loves Larry Johnson. And then, 7-8 weeks later, he pops for Ohio State after his official. So I have felt very good about hanging on to Grady since the day he committed. Offered, I think, again, I'm not trying to be negative on this. I've become more positive on this over the last 6 months. I would give Ohio State a better chance of keeping him than losing him. I don't think it's going to be stress-free, guys. I don't think that we're not going to hear anything about Naeem Offord for 5 more months until he's in Columbia. I don't think that's how this is going to go. I think there's going to be late desperation offers from Auburn, from Alabama, from all sorts of places. You got to remember, Auburn desperately wants to keep this kid home. Kalen DeBoer is desperate to keep this thing together. He has got to come out swinging, or they're going to eat him alive replacing Saban. There are schools that are incentivized to just go nuts, just go above and beyond just the craziness with Offord. And I think we're going to see that happen in October, November, December. But I feel better about their chances of keeping him today than I did the day he committed. I was like, oh, Auburn's going to flip that one. And they haven't yet, but I don't think they're out of the woods. Again, more likely than not to stick would be my stance, but not without some stress. So I think basically right now your guys are hoping it's a Jeremiah Smith deal where, he stresses you out for a month or two and then goes, sticks with his commitment and signs. Look, I would have told you that when he committed. Like the day he committed, I felt bad. People were kind of mad at me. I kind of threw a wet blanket on him. Like, long way to go, guys. We'll see. Now everyone knows who leads, kind of thing. And it would not. I said Mathis is like the guy. It's like, yeah, that's the guy that may not end up here. Alford wouldn't be too far down the list, but I think they've done a really good job. Walton has done a great job. Even just like they survived, like he visited Alabama, like it felt like every day for like 2 weeks he was at Alabama. They survived that. I mean, they've done a great job there. So, but again, if you're looking for that to be stress-free the next 4 months, I'm sorry, it's not going to be. I don't think so. I don't think they were ever in a position of strength for DeBose. It just always felt like he was going to go to Alabama or LSU to me. I don't think they ever led. I know everyone wanted to make the Cleveland connection, but I never felt good about that one. So I don't think so. Yes, Kevin is running. Kevin is producing. So all these questions, yeah, Kevin's running the show. As of a week ago, no. I don't think they've replaced Aaron Dunston yet. I don't think so. So obviously if they haven't, which I believe is correct, no, they're not at full capacity. And quite frankly, that was a brutal time to lose her. Like if she does that in February or even like late January, there were times that she could have done that, and it's like, okay, yeah, we'll find a replacement in a month or two. But like in the heat of recruiting season in June, you got official visits going on, you got unofficial visits going on, you got camps to just kind of like up in that was not ideal for Ohio State. That was a little like under the radar, underrated like loss for them was from a organization. Like she does a lot of like the organizational stuff, like the scheduling, like all the logistics. Those are things she had a big hand in. Like when you lose that, is she the person like closing the deal on recruits? Is she like Marc Pantoni of like the GM? No, but like she's like directing everyone what they need to be doing, when they need to be doing. Like that is you lose your logistics person. That is that's a tough blow right in the middle of the recruiting hot season. Oh, no, it was my fault. I was late. I'll take the blame. I have not heard that. It would make some sense. And maybe Ryan Day coming out and saying, yeah, the coaches just needed a break. I don't know, like, if that's a better thing to say than being like, yeah, Michigan caught us with our pants down and stole Aaron Dunston, and we didn't know we weren't able to reorganize in time to do something like that. That may have been a worse answer than saying, yeah, the coaches just needed a little bit of a break. I don't know. I have not been told that, but it wouldn't shock me. He's all right. Let's not give him too much credit here. We can't tell him too many positive things here. Keep him in line. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think they pivoted very well from Alford. I think they did. Got anything else? I can, we've been going here, 2 hours and 20 minutes. Let's wrap up. I'll try and do this again pretty regularly. Maybe Kevin can join me on some of them too, from a live perspective. I just felt, because I was at the center, like the discourse yesterday, and I am kind of the recruiting guy for the site. I felt that maybe just the one-on-one, so to speak, was a better format for live right now. But I will try and do more of these, the live ones, because they do very well for us. You guys seem to enjoy them. Check out the Huddle board for some scrimmage news. Tegra's making a move at right guard. I know Hinsman's missed some time with illness. So that's, there was already competition there. It's made things even more interesting, I think, with Hinsman missing some practices and Tegra starting to find his way a little bit at guard. You got Montgomery in there. There are things I can say that are obvious, like Caleb Downs, pretty good. Jeremiah Smith, pretty good. Carnell Tate, pretty good. Like, those are, like, I feel almost dumb saying those, because you wouldn't have to have any inside information. You could just say that and no one would know if you had inside information or not. But those are all very true things. Julian Sayin has been very impressive throughout fall camp. I can say that for sure. So there's a few things. I think, again, Josh Simmons is a guy who I think went from people were like mad they took him out of the portal to now like best offensive lineman on the team and potential like second round pick right now, maybe even play his way into a first if he has a great year. So there's some interesting things going on with that. One thing I'll throw out there, I don't think this is breaking news, but this is something I continue to hear, is James Peoples is fantastic, and they've got this amazing 1-2 punch right now with Quinshawn and Trey. But I think we're going to see quite a bit of James Peoples this year. I think people are going to be very excited about him. So hang on, head out to BuckeyeHuddle.com on the board. I know we had some insight posted from the scrimmage yesterday that maybe I didn't cover here. Some of our guys had some insight to provide, and so check that out. Great time to sign up. It's $12.99 a month if you want to do the monthly. Give us a shot. But I literally, I believe, just taking the temperature of you guys and your excitement, I really think this is the most anticipated Ohio State football season in a really long time. Maybe since the year they were coming off the title in 2014, maybe that following year. I think this is just the excitement just seems so huge right now. I think so. It'd be a great time to come over and hang out with us, talk to a whole army of your fellow Ohio State fans, and enjoy the ride together. So let's see where it goes. But yeah, let's wrap this up. You can head over to Huddle board, and we can always answer questions there if you have them. And I'm usually pretty good on responding on Twitter to things as well. But just head over there. But hope to see you over there if you're not already. And again, thanks for joining us and making this worth doing.